I'm just going to give a one-line introduction because you have their bios, so because we just have 1 hour and there is a lot to be discussed. Bahar Ali is AMAR's top representative in the Kurdistan region, and she is holding direct responsibility for the implementation of the Stop Gender-Based Violence project in northern Iraq. Dr. Bayan Kader Rasool is a medical professional with more than 32 years of experience, and she specializes in women health. Our two first speakers will do a joint presentation, followed by my colleague and friend, Dr. Kathleen Kunast, who is the director of the Gender Peacebuilding Center at the United States Institute for Peace. And our last speaker is Bill Frelick, who is the director of the refugee program at Human Rights Watch. Each of our speakers will speak for 5 minutes, so that will make 20 minutes in total, and then we will open the floor for your questions, discussions, and I'm told I should stop at 11:30, correct? Okay, we have a full hour. Okay, let's start with Ms. Bahar Ali.
Good morning, everybody, and it's a great pleasure for me to be with you today in this wonderful place. My presentation will be on the situation of IDPs and Syrian refugees and more Iraqi IDPs in Kurdistan of Iraq, because I'm working there and I have more information about there. So it is the situation is So the situation in the area where a lot of IDPs, or more than 95% of IDPs is there, it is in Kurdistan of Iraq. So before June 2014, where ISIS is control a large piece of Iraq, it was in Kurdistan about 300,000 IDPs from center and south of Iraq, and about 600,000 Syrian refugees. And it was at that time also conflict between Erbil and Baghdad. There was no budget coming from central of Iraq to Kurdistan at that time. It's about 10 months. But after June, when ISIL controlled some parts of Iraq, the number of IDPs became about more than 1.8 million people. New Syrian refugees also coming now because of Kobani situation. Before we leave, 450 families were arrived, and they are expecting or more than 100,000 people from Syria. So if you see the most places of Syrian refugees are in the north of Iraq in Kurdistan, and also IDPs are, most of them, they are in this area. So IDPs, they are from different, who are targeted by ISIS. They are from different background, different ethnic and religion groups and minorities. So there were Yazidi, Christian, Shabak, Turkmen, Arab, Kurd, Muslim, all was targeted by ISIS. But it was also the behaviors of ISIS was different from group to group. For example, for Christians, it was possible to pay tax or convert to Islam, or they have to leave their home. But for Yazidis, they have to pay tax, convert to Islam. In both conditions, they have to leave their home also. So it was different behaviors with them. So more than hundreds of Yazidi women were kidnapped by ISIS, and thousands of men were killed by ISIS. So They were, as Emma Nicholson also mentioned in her presentation, they were living in schools, all old cars, unfinished building everywhere in schools also. So the women, I'm focusing on women, the situation of men there, different groups. For example, most of them, they are witnessing, they saw what happened to them or to their family when ISIS come or enter their places and kidnapped. Some of them were kidnapped by ISIS, and there is a number of them, they are success to return back to their family. So there are different groups, different people, they need also different deal with different resolution for them. So this girl, she's under 12 years old. She also kidnapped by ISIS. Now she's come back. She's in very bad situation. She cannot sleep all the night, not her and not family. She's traumatized. And that's the daily life of women there, you know, as, where there is a conflict, women should responsible to have water, and children also, they are going to bring food from the organization who are providing food for them. So in a hot summer and in a cold winter, so you know that's a kind of the violence inside the family against children, because they send their children to bring water and to bring food. So I want to talk about the effect of this situation on the society, on the host society also. From June till now, the gender-based violence were increased in the society in all Iraq, and especially in Kurdistan. For example, it was and also it is affects human rights and women's rights. It is not more the priority. The issues of women, gender-based violence, women's rights, human rights, it is not priority for not local government and also for not international organization and UN agencies. They are all focused on security. So security and providing weapon to local government, it is the priority for most of the organization. So just before we came, we discovered that there are shelters in Kurdistan. The number of women who using this shelter, it become half now. So it needs some assessment, what's the reason, but we think that because they are not more trust the people who are securing the shelters, and maybe they are not sure also if they will be in shelter when ISIS come, the women, the first targeted group. So it's affected that. Also there is some directors and some government institutions who are working on gender-based violence and domestic violence. They are also now more focusing on security issues. They are also, their work, it's not their priority, their original or their real work, it's not their priority. So poverty also, there is increasing poverty because of the situation, because of the crisis between Baghdad and Erbil. So the most people who are who were benefit before from the social support from the government were women. So now they are not getting their income, their salary regularly from the government. Also the whole situation, the whole civic, democratic and democracy process in the region is in risk, because before that it was by the support of international community and UN agencies, organization, government in both Iraq and Kurdistan. They have some strategies they want to work to. They started to democratization, or they made some steps to democratization of the country, of the government and the society. But now it is all stopped. It doesn't become the priority now. And also it is okay, thank you. So my colleague, Dr. Bayan, she will finish the rest.
The last one, we can also focus on it, that the schools are used as shelter. So more, is the mic? Sorry. So more than 700 schools in the whole region and in the North Iraq is now occupied by the IDPs and by the refugees. So the education in the region, the host community also stopped and affected, and that also affect the future education and the education issues of which is basic for our community and needed. If we conclude the recommendation and what we are needed in the time being to respond to the crisis is we divide in two pieces, in short term and in the long term. In short term, now we go on that we're facing very traumatized people who are, we met until now about 6-7 girls who are getting back from the ISIL. They managed to escape from them in a way and another. So they come in and they are in a situation who must have supporting them in a way, or maybe they need to be sent outside the region because everything reminding them of what's happening. Every story, and everybody asking the security, the family, the doctor. So this traumatizes them more and more because in the first action as a professional, I'm working with them. Maybe they didn't need to speak about it because they have the acute stress symptoms. So remembering everything immediately is not good for them. So they have nightmares. They have sometimes sleep disturbance. They have also physically they have injuries. They have UTI. They have infection. They may need assessment about sexual transmitted disease because they have more sexual partner. They have so many medical issues. It must not be provided good service because it is not stable in Iraq. We didn't have such opportunity to have this thing to offer because there's so many IDPs we have. The second one, some adoption from the other guest countries, the European countries or other countries who can support them in this issue. Providing shelter survival, because last week when before we did was a very bad weather condition. Most of the tents are falling down and was a mud and water and flood. So that picture we saw no more exists. So it's now cold and winter is coming. So we must provide them with basic of the life. Is the shelter, cover, ceiling above you, and also heating. It's very important. Providing emergency health and mental health support the victim, as I said, as a general report, because all of them victims, most of them traumatized and been able to continue their daily life. So emergency fund for the victims and for the who's escaping from the ISIS, they need, because some of them they didn't come to the people. They go secretly at night to the clinics, private clinics. So it's because they are for society they didn't want to be known they was undergoing. So maybe they need some money to give them and secretly they manage their problem or the health issues. And providing human-friendly service for the women in the shelters, in the camps, because we need that after in the night there's no light and they have not so good bathrooms and also they are close to each other in whole life. As we see with the Qurans, when we go to Kharkiv, more than 1,000 people in this hall. So every from the old age, from one day old baby until 80 years old women. So they are crowded and with each other. Day by day they have crush and they have problem with each other. There's adolescents, there's young generation with old generation. So we must have a woman-friendly space in the camps. So other things we have. Yes, long term we want to have program for empowering the survival, establishing a center for PTSD in the region because we have now from for the last 65 years there is war in Iran. Until now we didn't have a professional PTSD or trauma center which must be there. So it's needed in the future to work on it, involving and supporting media to show these girls as a victim of the war and to change attitude of the people, the community, that they are used as a victim in the war. Stop trafficking in the region because they are.
Just finish this.
Yes. And the train community leaders and the teachers and the people to how to work with the traumatized society because they didn't know. And the other one is the organization for the women because they are now parents. They use all the strategic power they needed to escape from the ISIL. So if we focus on these women and the young girls, they will be a good leader in the future and they can come up for their rights, provide legal support to recognize them as victims of the war, and supporting democratic process in the country. And the conclusion is disbursement in the KRG may stay for a long time, so there's no any option of no perspective they are coming back, going back to their place. So we need support for Kurdistan regional government and NGOs like AMAR who is working in the field, and Iraq's government and international organization, EU and global NGOs need to support and have eye to this, not only military, so it's very good to have military support, but humanitarian also important. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll come back to all the topics you mentioned in the discussion. That will 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Hare, the Baroness, and the group. All right, very good. I am a social cultural anthropologist, and I always like to make things very relevant to where I live so I can understand what we're talking about. And when we begin to look at the numbers of displaced people, it is basically twice the size of the District of Columbia. Imagine overnight, twice the size of the people who live in Washington, D.C. had to flee with nothing, or rarely, maybe just a coat or something. It's important to put this in perspective because over 57% of them are under 18 years of old. So they are also without the tools, the perspectives of how to intervene and help themselves as such. So I just wanted to begin emphasizing how dramatic, tragic this fast-changing arena is in Syria and now Iraq. My emphasis in my last 4 minutes is really to focus on not only the violence against women and girls, but to really broaden the perspective of gender. That gender is not simply another name for women, but men and boys are also gendered beings. It is important because in order to understand this brutal and extreme violence, we must broaden our analytical and response lens to look at hyper-masculinity notions that are being propagated under the Islamic State or ISIL. We must continue to challenge these human rights abuses and its flawed notions about Islam and gendered understandings. But we have to understand what are the incentives? Why has some sort of failed adulthood or the sense of a right toward some kind of hyper-manhood express something and attract so many young men and young women? We must address the victimization, but unless we broaden our gendered lens, we are not going to get at what is going on there. We have to consider that sexualized and gender-based violence is no longer a normal thing of war. We already have enormous data points to know that there are many violent conflicts that do not resort to this sexualized tool of war. But in the case of ISIS, they have honed it to an art because, as the Baroness said, it is much more effective than a bullet. And as Patrick Kamar, General, of the UN says, and far cheaper. We must come to terms with that this is about power, about social status, and it is about a kind of rite of passage of malehood that uses or abuses notions of religion to significantly brutalize the individual, the family, and the community. And so in order to do that, not only do our practitioner models have to have ideas and good tools to help address men who are witnesses also to extreme violence, but to intervene early with young boys and ask these questions, because we cannot keep producing generations of young males who think this is the way to manhood. It is incredibly important that we immediately address the post-traumatic stress, and the fact that I will add that this group of the size twice of the District of Columbia, it's not only been moved once, but multiple times. So the traumatization is happening over and over again. So it's just the sense of urgency is now. It is not going to go away. As Dr. Esfandari said, we have to think bigger, and we need to take a super leadership role in what this means. And I will stop.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. I think it's always an honor to be partnered at a conference like this with a humanitarian organization. Human Rights Watch is a human rights organization, and just to be clear, the way that we work is a really complementary way. Those who are actually providing the blankets and the tents and food for people that seem as traumatized as they are. And what we do on the human rights side is not that, not the humanitarian side, but we're trying to document human rights abuses and then to advocate on behalf of people who have suffered these abuses. And in the history of the human rights movement, progressively up until this point, it's really been a process of perpetrators of human rights abuses becoming ever more sophisticated in the ways that they cover their tracks. We now have an international criminal court. We have better tools than ever before to prosecute, to hold accountable perpetrators of human rights abuse. We have better tools than ever before, satellite imagery and really sophisticated ways of analyzing human rights abuses that we didn't even think about 10 years ago. And yet now we're confronted with a perpetrator that calls into question some of the fundamental presuppositions of the way that we do our work. And in a nutshell, as Dr. Esfandari was saying in her opening remarks, our work is about naming and shaming. But what do you do when the perpetrator knows no shame and is actually proud of the abuses that they commit? And this is what we found in the most remarkable experience. On October 14th, we issued a report, the title of which is Forced Marriage Conversion for Yazidis. It was based on interviews with 76 internally displaced people in northern Iraq, in some of the very places that you saw. It involved 16 who had escaped from ISIS detention, and there were telephone interviews as well with some people who were still in, women and girls who were still in ISIS detention. One of the difficulties methodologically for us is that Yazidi culture has such a huge stigma about any kind of sexual relations outside of marriage, and marriage is absolutely restrictively required in members of the same religion, that there wasn't a single woman who told us directly that she had been raped. And yet, many of the accounts were accounts of what they heard or what they saw from what was happening to other people, and euphemisms for being taken away. And I want to read just one small excerpt from this report to give you just a sense of this, and you can see it on our webpage. It's at www.hrw.org. And I'll just read a 15-year-old girl, Rusha, who escaped on September 7th, told Human Rights Watch that in late August, after she had been held for about 3 weeks, Islamic State forces transported her in a convoy of 4 buses to Iraq and Syria with her sister and about 200 other young women and girls, and detained them in a large house in the southern part of the city. The following day, a group of armed men came and took away 20 of the captives. Rusha said that the girls told her that the men bought the women and girls. The next day, Rusha said an Islamic State leader, whom others called Amir, sold her and her 14-year-old sister to a Palestinian fighter with Islamic State. Rusha said that she did not see the exchange of money, but the fighter told her with pride that he had bought her for $1,000 US. The fighter told Rusha's sister that night, the fighter sold Rusha's sister that night to another fighter and took Rusha to the apartment on the outskirts of Raqqa. There she said she fended off the man's sexual attack and escaped through an unlocked door while he slept. I'll let you connect the dots from testimony of that kind. But clearly, selling women into sexual slavery, basically, is what we're talking about here. So on the same day that we issued that report, and when we usually expect that the people that we accuse of committing crimes of this kind come up with a defense and accuse us of lying and having ulterior motives of whatever kind, Dabiq magazine, the one that Dr. Asadiari mentioned already, actually had published their article saying that everything that we said was absolutely true and that they were proud of it, and that, in fact, and I'm quoting from the magazine article, it's in English, it's glossy, it's available, they're very, very sophisticated in their use of social media and magazines. But, quote, "One should remember that enslaving families of the non-believers and taking their women as concubines is firmly established aspect of Islamic law." And they go on to explain that as we saw already in the slide, the Christians can pay a tax, but Yazidis are considered to be non-believers, and forced conversion and enslavement is, not only permissible, but it's something that's actually a good thing to do. And so I realize I'm maybe running out of time. So what I want to come back to is this really. I mean, we've really struggled with this, Human Rights Watch, where we name the perpetrator, and the abuse is out there and it's very well known. And what do you do at the point where the perpetrator, in this really remarkable way, says, yes, that's exactly what we do, and we think this is God's will, basically. This is the right thing for us to be doing. And I think that, the parting thought that I have on this, coming from a human rights organization that uses as its guidepost the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the notion of human rights are the same for all people globally, everywhere, regardless of their sect, their beliefs, their race, religion, whatever it may be, that we need really to underscore the universality of human rights in the face of sectarian exceptionalism, if you want to call it that, to basically say that you have a green light to do these kinds of abuses for whatever sort of narrow reason. And I think ultimately we need to work and to prevail in this battle of ideas, and that's really what I think we're confronted with. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to skip the prerogative of the chair to ask the first question, because I'm sure there are many questions from the audience. So, give you 30 seconds. If not, I'll ask the first question. Yes, please.
Yes, my name is Hanadi Saman. I'm a professor of Arab Women's Literature and Studies at UVA. I'd like to thank you all for your testimony, and I would like to start with a commentary that sometimes While I condone everything that ISIS is doing and all the atrocious things that ISIS is doing, I think we should heed the colleague who called and asked us to widen the lens, the examination lens, to also examine what has been happening in Syria where ISIS is located. For the last 4 years, since the Syrian revolution in 2011, women and children have been raped systematically. As we sit right here talking about the rape of other Yazidi women, there are rape camps and places that are set for Assad militias currently. We have a situation where a young boy by the name of Hamza al-Khatib in 2011, at the start of the Syrian revolution in Daraa, his body was returned to his family, burned and castrated. We have another girl by the name of Zainab al-Husayni, whose body was dismembered in Hama, and we also were all aware of the chemical attacks that happened in Ghouta. So I think while it's essential to work for the people that are affected, the minority people that are affected by ISIS, we should also not forget the reason why ISIS was created in this area, which is the Assad regime, and we should also lend them our hand and our and think that they're worthy of our human rights sympathy. Thank you.
Indeed, expanding the lens is I think, at the same time, enormously complex issue, and it's one that you've put your finger right on. One of the issues in terms of expanding the lens of gender, and is critical, is that we also see many young boys being victims of sexual violence, and it is, of course, the absolute taboo to talk about. And we know this is happening not only in Iraq among the Iranians, but indeed Syria, where it has become a systematic process. The question is how to intervene, how to make this on such a policy level that people begin to realize that this is the nature of the bullet. These are the weapons that are being used, children and young women. Would you like to talk about something like that?
Yes, I very much appreciate your comments and totally agree with the point that you're making. And we have been particularly concerned among many of the IDPs in Iraq. In fact, we just had a research team that was outside of Tuscarmato and along the road there, Stretch Road. These were Sunni displaced people, I think some of whom had actually been prevented from crossing into northern Iraq. And they were receiving no assistance whatsoever from anyone. And some of them witnessed the Shia militias. So these are militias that are affiliated with the central government in Baghdad, but are operating through their own, as militias are, paramilitary structures. And that those militias that were, in a sense, quote unquote, saving them from ISIS were the very ones who burned down their villages, looted their villages, and left them destitute. We actually, a colleague of mine that was on that mission did an op-ed piece this weekend in the Washington Post, pointing out the importance as we work to address human rights abuses by ISIS, that we don't overlook the abuses that are happening by these militias against some of the very same people who have been victimized first by ISIS, but now it's really jumping from the frying pan to the fire. And certainly, with respect to the Assad regime as well, that we've been documenting since the very beginning and continue to do so. And I think we're really in a position now where we're looking to so many parties to this conflict that are so phenomenally abusive to the civilians who are caught up in it. And the other issue that's an enormous one for the humanitarian side is access to these populations, where the security is there were no Iraqi government security forces that our team encountered anywhere along that area. These were all militias of one sort or another, and no central forces from the government itself.
You want to add something?
Yes. So I think what happened to Yazidi or other minorities, it is like continuation of what happened in Syria before. So what happened, it is not suddenly. When ISIS controlled Mosul, it was not, we are not surprised because 2 years, 3 years conflict in Syria, and before that in Iraq also, the conflict between different religion groups, between Kurd, Shia, Sunni, before that also like a reason that ISIS can control Mosul. That's what happened now. So it is not only Assad regime and Iraqi government, they are responsible for part of that. I think international community also is responsible for that because the continuation of what happened in Syria, they get Assad regime to life more. I think it's one of the biggest reasons for that. And before that, Iraqi regime, Saddam's regime also, he left 20,000 Al-Qaeda people enter Iraq during the second Gulf War, before 2003, so he knows that will be happening. So all these situations that led to what we are now living. Thank you.
Our humanitarian services for AMAR, we are working in the Lebanese camp 2 years ago, also for Syrian refugees. So our access or our activity didn't make any difference between refugees from Syria or the IDPs in Iraq. So we are humanitarian and we are doing our service for all the people who are there.
My name is Platzer, and I want to thank all of you, especially colleagues and for a wonderful overview of the situation. My question to you is, do you think ISIS is a movement or not? And if it is a movement, it must be responding to some needs, to some fears and some dreams of the area. I don't think ISIS is isolated to one country in the Middle East. I believe ISIS is a metaphor for a crisis of masculinity that is general to the area. It's a reappropriation of space. That's why they are so opposed to women who have professions. It's to restructure power, especially within the family, because that's what is at the core of democracy. Democracy is not only what the governments in the area do, but also what's happening within each individual family. So I would be very interested to ask you if you think, in fact, there is a crisis of masculinity in the areas that we see ISIS becoming more and more powerful. Who wants to do
I think that's true. I think I've already stated that I do think, and I love your quote, a metaphor for a crisis in masculinity. I mean, if you look at their propaganda videos, they're masterful. They appeal to young men and women. I will keep adding that. But it's like, what are you doing playing with your video games? You know, that's not real war. That's not, you have no mission in your life. They appeal to people who feel attracted. And they have a very incentivized program. We have the real guns, get away from your video games. We have a real mission, and we will pay you, and you will have power. So it is a crisis of power. And I think if we don't don't expand our gender analysis, capture that, and only focus on the victimization, we'll never get at what is causing the victimization so that we can end the victimization. So thank you for your comment. Anybody else wants to comment on it?
About the ISIS, they have dream computer, yes, their movement, they have their ideology, and they are not happy to call them ISIS because they said we are not only for Iraq and Syria, they like to call them IS, Islamic State. So they have plans, they have dream to control all over the world. But why they started from Syria and Iraq? Because the environment, the political, economic situation in this area was very suitable for them, was possible to start from there, but they have planned for the other places.
I just had one other thought that it is reactionary in the sense that in this region, in this heavily Sunni area, they have had experience with the Maliki regime, with having really withstood years now of feeling that they had no chance, no voice whatsoever in the government of Iraq, and have experienced tremendous human rights abuses, hardships, and so on. So they've got a fertile field in which to then have an ideology that not only appeals to those who play video games, but actually, when people feel that the situation has been polarized on sectarian lines to such a degree that it's either us or them, and so I've got to go with the devil I know because he's part of my defined group in some way. And we've seen this, we've seen it in the Balkans, we've seen it in many other places where people that have lived relatively pluralistic lives, relative tolerance for long periods of time, under the pressures of sectarian war, end up, having extremists that basically represent them because there's no middle ground, and the middle ground's been forced out or killed.
My sense is that religion plays a very important role because, as Catherine said, when you look at the propaganda, you look at the video, they have one method of addressing the books, to get fighters and women also joining them. From there was 125 French women are now scattered around Syria, married to these fighters or whatever. And then they have a different video for the ones who want to attract from the region. And it is mostly based on, the notion of the caliphate, as you know, and how you will be serving God and how all the promises that are made to you in the Quran, you will be able to fulfill them. So, they are very clever when it comes to social media. That's
Just one example, they are not all dreaming, they are also acting very quickly. They come to Mosul after 3 days, they order all doctors and nurses in this hospital and medical center to do circumcision to girls from 1 year until 45 years old ladies. We are working 25 years to raise that, to raise the awareness for FGM as a human right violation for the children and the women. And they come in 1 day, they order all the people to do, for doctor to do 3 doctors obey this, they executed 3 colleagues or gynecologists, they are executed because they are not obeying this order. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Dina Hurwitz, and I teach human rights clinic at the law school here. I have a couple of points I wanted to make. First of all, thank you very much for this excellent presentation. Raises a lot of very helpful questions and also very interesting possible avenues for response, for advocacy. But first of all, a little bit in piggybacking on what Dr. Farzani has just said, and also some things that were raised by Dr. Esfandiari. What is the background to all this? I think that one of the things that we should think about is the reaction to the so-called Arab Spring, especially in Syria, where the movement was really brutally cut off, and it was, it was the idea of this new embrace of some kind of a relationship between democracy and secular Islam or political Islam that was really stopped in its tracks. So I think well, this has been said by several people, but it's a crisis of religion, it's a crisis of masculinity, it's a crisis of ideology and politics, of course. And to me, one of the things that I would like to put out on the table and hear your thoughts about, I think, well, Bill used the phrase sectarian exceptionalism, and this is an issue that I think is really important, especially in this country. I think also in Europe, in the West, Islam is just seen as such a monolith. People don't really take the time to understand the nuances of Islam, the fact that ISIS is, of course, I think people understand that ISIS is a very extreme and fundamentalist, radical interpretation, but it also feeds into this notion that Islam is very sexist, is very monolithic, and that it demands an uncritical following. And I think that it's critically important for Muslims and for scholars and for anthropologists to help the United States, help people in this country and in Europe understand and recognize the nuances in Islam, and the fact that there are Islamic clerics, scholars, civil society, women's organizations who are approaching these problems not from purely a secular perspective, but saying that this is not acceptable in Islam. It's certainly not acceptable in contemporary times, but it isn't really part of the fundamental, the core, let's say, of Islam. I think that's really important. And I also think that we also need to find ways to support those voices in the Muslim world who are saying just that this is, that there has to be a more nuanced understanding of what Islamic law is, and that would also help. I think that the point of that is to help women who want to fight against the actions of ISIS or the governments without being called anti-Muslim or democratic or Western tools.
Thank you. This is a very quick comment. I agree that the religious leaders in the Middle East and the Muslim world are trying to come up with a statement against ISIS, but personally I feel that the appeal of the ISIS language to the young is more powerful than the language of the religious leaders to the young people. And the recent example of the stoning of the woman in Syria revealed this clash among the young people. I'm talking about my country in Jordan, who did not sympathize with the girl, but they actually did not directly support ISIS, but they remained silent. And I think this is an alarming sign for the coming future.
Any comment on the previous two story of lot of problem among them. There is forced marriage, early marriage, and prostitution. You know, there is a lot of big bands. They are working in this area. So they need other sort of support, and also host community, because most of the refugees, most of the IDPs, they are living among people, among host communities. So they are also in need. They are the host community in Iraq. They are the first start of democratic institutionalized the country. So I think such support is really very essential.
About what you said about the amount of religious leader, I think it's right that they appeal stronger to the young generation, but forget not that these leaders, with their speech in the Friday speech, and in they give a chance to grow these ideas. So in the time being, maybe, but for the future, if we want to have a peace building or a better understanding to the Islam as a peaceful way, we must, the Azhar and other religions must change that the speech, the type of the speech. So because we have also from Kurdistan, we have some fighters who are going to Syria, and they are coming back now. Or some people are captured in there. They say that we are also victim of this speech we have seen. So I think that for the long term, we must obey them or commit them that this speech must be changed. We must have another commitment how we are understanding Islam in a peaceful way, not this way. Thank you very much.
September, a month ago, when 120, as I referred, scholars, and a couple of clerics came out and condemned ISIS's atrocities against women. Until then, everybody else around the Muslim world and in the Arab countries was condemning ISIS as a terrorist group. They couldn't bring themselves to tackle the women's issue. And if you go through that list, the Mufti the Sheikh of Azhar is not there among the signatories. You see what I mean? Even so, no matter what, and not everybody who joins ISIS is educated and so on. Therefore, if they come out and condemn what they do to women, then it might at least make these people think 3 times before they go out and do that. Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Julia Aristide, Women Peace and Security Policy Director for Women Action for New Directions in Washington, D.C. And in this field, we always are very careful to cast women not only as victims, but as strong advocates and peace builders. And I know through my work and conversations with women in the region that they've been working for many years to fight the sectarianism and the rise of extremism. And even now, obviously, like our colleagues here and others are working to combat ISIS, advocating for women and children, for rights, for services, for legal reform, and other things. So I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about what women in civil society organizations are doing on the ground and what kind of support they need.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that I am very quickly spoke about the recommendation we did, that of the time being we have a need that civil society to be have support and have also the ability how to react to how to respond to the conflict like this, because the rape was not an issue in Iraq. Now we have every day of the girls from ISIL escape, they are not only raped, really raped and abused in manners nobody can, also the profession isn't able to listen to it. It's very, very cruelly So the civil society didn't have that power or that skill to manage it. Not every NGO has a psychiatrist of psychosocial support, because also mental health issues is very new in the region. So I think that mental health counseling is a need for in the time being. And the second one also that is supposed to the whole society, the community here as a general. I think this is what we are doing now is more relief, more travel shelter to get them some medical help, but others will be able to do it, unfortunately.
Maybe just to add capacity building of the women organizations, how to deal with these cases, how to deal with this urgent situation, because this is very issues is new for women organizations, and also funding them to continue to their work, because as I said, the priority is not for women organization or to work on long-term things, and also legal assistance is very, very important, because most of the laws in Iraq and I think in Syria the same. They are not supporting women. For example, we are talking about raping thousands of Yazidi women and other women also. But according to Iraqi law, if a man raped a woman, if he promised to marry her, so there is no any punishment for him. So he will be free. So I can imagine it is now maybe it is very difficult to punish ISIS fighters. But I'm sure that this rape will be happen inside the society themselves also. So how to deal with that? So I think one of the things we're working on changing or amending local laws also, and how to be agree or include the international laws of human rights to include it in the law. I think one of the things is very important.
We have time for one question. I would like to invite one of the students to ask a question. Yes, please.
Hi.
Can you come to the table and use a mic, or there is a mic right behind you, please. Yes.
My name is Yahya Saad. I'm a third-year student at the university. I want to thank you all for coming out to speak. I'm really glad that this conference is going on. As a Muslim, I want to make clear the fact that I do condemn these people, and I hate that these people are acting in the name of my religion, which I hold very dearly to me, and misconstrue what's said in the Quran. However, I want to touch on the subject of Muslim clerics and scholars coming out and condemning the Islamic State. I think it's important to acknowledge in Islam there is no clergy. So it's, for me, the Sheikh of Al-Azhar, his opinion doesn't matter that much to me personally. And to a lot of Arabs in the area who see him as kind of this political puppet. So they don't hold his word or his condemnations very heavy. Another thing is that there has been, I think it's very important for Muslims across the board to condemn the act. This is just, it disgusts me what they're doing in the name of our religion, and we have to act in defense of our religion to condemn these people. But there's this pressure. Why aren't Muslims condemning these things? Why aren't enough of these clerics condemning these things? I see sheikhs, I follow sheikhs in the Middle East, sheikhs in America, all over the world, every single day on social media trying to say something. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf Zaytuna gave a whole hour sermon using Islam to debunk what ISIS is doing. And we published, there was the letter, as you guys were talking about, the letter to Baghdadi, lettertobaghdadi.com. I encourage you all to go on the website. However, I think it's important to realize now Muslims are there are some Muslims who are remaining silent. Why is this? Let's look into why they're kind of remaining silent. And on the inside, they do condemn what they're doing, but they feel defensive in the fact that no matter how many people come out and condemn this, it feels like this is not enough. More people need to come out and condemn this. This is not enough. And why is it that the Knights Templar, a drug cartel in South America, acts in the name of Christianity, claims their leader is the resurrection of Christ? Why is it that we're not calling on all Christian clergy to condemn that? Why aren't all Christian clergy condemning the Lord's Resistance Army? So they feel that there's this imbalance. So how can we work to address this imbalance and make them feel more comfortable with coming out against it?
Thank you very much.
I come from a Shiite background, so we have an abundance of clerics. I know the Sunnis don't have, but we have an abundance of them, and they have not come out to condemn that. I agree with you, but because ISIS is using Islam, so therefore you have to fight, among other things, you have to fight them on their territory and tell them, this is not Islam, you are giving us a bad name. Thank you. Thank you for your intervention. We have run out of time. I would like to thank the panelists. And I think you have 3 minutes to change panels and grab a cup of coffee for the next trip. Thank you very much.